This Pesach 5785 2025 is the 20th Yartzeit of my grandfather of blessed memory, Rabbi Shlomo Wolbe. And every year, when it comes to his Yartzeit, when it comes to the anniversary of his passing, we try to take a lesson from his life, try to learn something about his character, and try to hopefully elevate ourselves from his example. And this year, I want to pick out an idea that can be very revolutionary and transformative for us all. My grandfather, blessed memory, he was born in Berlin, and he lived in Germany until he went to yeshiva. Well, first he went to yeshiva in Germany in a place called Frankfurt, and then he went to yeshiva in a place called Montreux in Switzerland. But when he was in yeshiva in Switzerland, he was inspired to go to the big leagues, to go to the greatest yeshiva of them all, to travel to Poland and to learn in the Mir Yeshiva. Now, if these names don't ring the bell, think of it as the best of the best, and going from like a middling kind of program to an absolutely different level, a different stratosphere of a yeshiva. And he was there, and he studied under some of the greats, and he became a great scholar. He became someone who was very developed in his personal growth, in his Torah, in his connection with the Almighty. And then, of course, this is 1934, he went to Poland. 1938, I've told the story before, he was a German citizen, and all German citizens were suspected of being spies for the Nazis. They just canceled all the visas in Poland of all German citizens. And my grandfather, blessed memory, was in a quandary. He was in a pickle because it's 1938 and you have to leave Poland. Where are you going to go? So initially he went back to Germany for a little bit, and then he tried to go to a different place and got a temporary visa to go back to Poland for a couple of months. And he thought maybe I'll move to Latvia or Denmark, different places that he thought he could escape to. And he gets a letter inviting him to go serve as a rabbi and a teacher in Stockholm in Sweden. And he accepts, not because he dreamt of going to Scandinavia, not because he dreamt of going to Stockholm, to Sweden, but because he had no choice. And from 1938 until 1946, when he moved to Israel, before it was founded, of course, before the state was founded, British Mandate Palestine, if you will, from those 2 points, from 1938 to 1946, he was in Sweden. And there, he did some absolutely remarkable things. Firstly, he served on the Vad Hatzalah. What does that mean? Vad means like a congregation or a group or a council of Hatzalah, of salvation. They were aware of some of the things happening in Europe, and they did whatever they could to try to secure visas and exit permits and entry permits and passports and so on for the Jews trying to flee the inferno engulfing European Jewry. At one point, my grandfather befriended the Dutch consul in Stockholm and persuaded him to give visas to whoever asked for a visa. And ultimately, they managed to get around 1,000 visas to, some of them were exit visas, entry visas. They got visas to a place called Curacao, which is a tiny island in the Caribbean. I don't know if anyone who actually went to Curacao, but that was at least a ticket out of Europe. And once you're out of Europe, maybe you were safer. But he worked day and night trying to save as many people as possible. And I actually saw this year for the first time in 1966, he gave a testimony to Yad Vashem, to the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem, where he documented some of the things that happened and some of the efforts that he participated in trying to save as many people as possible with these vital, life-giving visas. He was in correspondence with some of the great Torah sages in Europe, and he was trying to help some of the yeshiva students flee. And even when he learned about yeshiva students stuck all the way across Asia, they wanted to go to Japan, but they needed some visa. He just found out about it and sent them these visas. And we have actually testimony of people who were there. They had left Europe. They had crossed over all of Asia on the Soviet Trans-Siberian Railroad. And they were about to cross over the Sea of Japan to get as far away as possible from Europe. And they needed like one visa and they couldn't get it. And suddenly it just shows up over there. Some rabbinic student in Sweden found out about their plight and arranged salvation for them. So that was one thing that he did. It's well known, we've talked about this in the past, that the yeshiva that he was a student of, was an alumnus of, that was really the only yeshiva that survived the war intact as a yeshiva. The whole yeshiva, almost everyone, which is the staff, the faculty, and the students, they managed to escape Europe together, cross over Asia, cross over the Sea of Japan to Kobe, Japan, eventually making their way back to the mainland in Shanghai. And for the duration of the war, there was a yeshiva, the Mir Yeshiva, not in Poland, not in New York, not in Jerusalem, but in Shanghai, in Japanese-controlled China. And at the time, you want to maintain a yeshiva, you need a lot of funds for that. So there were great rabbis in America raising millions of dollars for salvation efforts, including money for this yeshiva. But they had no way of transferring it because the United States and Japan were at war, as you know. So they needed a neutral third party. And my grandfather was a student, an alumnus of this yeshiva, and he was in neutral Sweden, so they would send him the money, and he would send it to Japan. And he served as this vital link, a conduit connecting these 2 points, the United States and the rabbis raising money and the yeshiva in Shanghai. He actually succeeded in securing 500 visas for the entire yeshiva to come back to Europe, but not to Poland, rather to Sweden. And at the time, I guess they realized that living in Japan Japan had allied with the Nazis, of course. That was a perilous circumstance. So he secured visas for them to come back to Sweden, but they had no way to get there once the Soviets were in the war. They refused to allow civilian passage on the Trans-Siberian Railroad. But he was involved in many efforts of salvation. And the story I want to tell today, I want to focus on today, and the lesson I want to learn today comes from what happened after the war. My grandfather was a very talented person and particularly gifted in languages. His father was actually a linguist and a professor in Berlin, and a historian and an author. And his father was proficient in 12 languages. Very talented individual. And my grandfather, let's remember, was also proficient in many, many languages. From what I understand, he spoke with some degree of fluency in 9 different languages. Now he arrives in Sweden. He was not expecting to be there, but he was there and he taught himself Swedish. And he actually wrote and published a book. It's a pretty thick book about the principles of Torah in Swedish. Sweden was a place where there was a high degree of assimilation, of intermarriage. Jews, they very quickly, even Jews that came from very strong Jewish backgrounds, once they got to Sweden, it was really a place of assimilation, where Jews really said goodbye to their Judaism and became Swedes. So he wrote a book to encourage and embolden and inspire Jewish Swedes to be prideful in their religion, to understand the basic principles of the religion and to cling to it. But after the war ended, my grandfather was reading a Swedish language newspaper. And he read a story about several trainloads of refugees that the Swedish government had accepted based upon humanitarian concerns. What to do? The war's over. There are maybe millions of survivors whose entire lives were destroyed. Homes were destroyed. Families were destroyed. They lived in the camps, in the death camps, in the slave camps. And they're refugees. What to do with them? So in their magnanimity and benevolence, the Swedish government, they said, we will take 20,000 Jewish female refugees. And the reason why they did that, of course, is under the pretenses of humanitarian concerns, but they had a little imbalance, a gender imbalance. They had more males than females. One of the ways that that's solved is by war. Had they participated in the war, you imagine a lot of the males would have died. But they were neutral, so they had a surplus of males. And they said, we'll solve the problem and we'll bolster our humanitarian chops, and we'll get some plaudits for that, some kudos for that. They accepted 20,000 Jewish female refugees. Now, my grandfather did not know that at the time, but he said, you know what? They're in this camp, this refugee camp. Let me take a train and go see what's happening there. Maybe there's some Jews there. He didn't know that they were Jews at the time, because there were a lot of different refugees, even non-Jewish refugees. So he travels on the train, and he goes to this camp, and he sees an enormous camp, and it's full of Jewish women. And he's a little bit disoriented about what he sees. And he's trying to figure out what's happening and who these people are and where they came from. And everyone, of course, is someone with a whole world, a whole life, a whole story. Everyone had their path of how they survived. Most had lost their families. Most were orphans who had nothing left and were traumatized by what they went through. And as he is there trying to figure out what to do, he hears a whistle. There's a bell that goes off. What's the bell? It's lunchtime. My grandfather brought a sandwich with him as well for lunch. He says, okay, I'm going to eat lunch as well. And he starts looking for a place to wash his hands. He wants to wash his hands for your sandwich. That's the halacha. That's the law. You got to wash your hands before you eat bread. So he's looking for some place to find. He finds some water, washes his hands, says the blessing. And he says he turns around and he sees a whole group of girls who are crying because they were just brought back to the world that they had long forgotten, the world from before the war. And they see this rabbi with a beard, rabbinic countenance, rabbinic dress, and he's washing his hands for bread, and he's saying a blessing. This was a tremendous callback for them to their lives that preceded the war. My grandfather was very, very taken by what he experienced. And he didn't know what to do. Like, what are you supposed to do about this problem? And on the train back to Stockholm, he determined that we have to open a school for these young women. A school they could learn about Judaism and they could be brought back to life. They could be nursed, rehabilitated back to a good place. And when he had that idea, he did something very radical. And this is the point I want to talk about today. He remembered a teaching from his teacher in the mirror, probably a decade prior. His teacher in the Mir, Rabbi Shlomo Wolbe, was a legendary mashgiach, the spiritual dean of the yeshiva. He once said that if you have an idea, if you have something which you're awakened to, and you want to do something good, something positive, a mitzvah, you cannot allow that idea to linger. You have to do something right away. So he's on the train. What can he do right away in the train? He gets off at the next stop. He doesn't wait until he arrives in Stockholm. He gets off at that next stop and he goes to the telegram place. He sends a telegram to all of his fellow members of that aforementioned Yartzeit, all the people in Sweden that were part of this effort, of this council of salvation. And he says, we're meeting tonight. We're meeting tonight. And he gets back on the train, gets back on another train, heads back to Stockholm, and they have a meeting that night. And at the meeting, my grandfather, blessed memory, he shares what he saw and what he learned and what he determined. What we need to do is open a school. Now, how do you open a school? You're in Sweden. You're part of a very, very small group of people that care about Torah and care about Jewish life and continuity. And the whole world is in shambles. The whole world, certainly Europe, is a big heap of rubble. And everyone's unsettled. And you want to open up a school, you need teachers, you need money, you need a building, you need a plan, not just an idea. But they determined at that meeting that if they succeed in getting the biggest part of the school, a building to house it, everything else, everyone's willing to do it. We'll do it if we get a building. So my grandfather wrote a letter to the Minister of Interior. What do you have to lose, right? He wrote a letter and explained the situation and sent the letter. And what do you know? The response comes back a few weeks later. How many buildings do you need? We'll start with one. They had the building. Everyone agreed, we're in. And indeed, in a very beautiful suburb of Stockholm, a place called Lidingö, and it's spelled with like symbols on top of the letters. You've seen that in foreign languages. Lidingö, Lidingo. I think on the O there's like 2 dots. I don't know where that comes from. But they opened up a school. And they went back to the refugee camp. And they offered the people there, would you like to join this? And several hundred students signed up. And the school was opened. And the local rabbi, Rabbi Jacobson, him and his wife were there in the school. And they ran the school. My grandfather was still in Stockholm working on his projects. But he would come in once a week to give a lecture on the Parsha and then go back. But this school lasted for several years. And it succeeded in rehabilitating not just the broken spirits, but the broken Jewish spirits of hundreds of young women. They were given emotional stability and health, but also brought back to their people. People who had lived for 3, 4, 5 years as slaves on the brink of death every single day, had completely forgotten everything about their Jewish life. They were restored. And indeed, most of the women, after the founding of the state of Israel, moved to Israel and built beautiful families with very strong, robust Jewish values. There's probably tens of thousands, maybe 100,000 plus descendants of those groups of women. who were nursed back to life in this stool in the wake of that terrible tragedy that engulfed so many of our brethren. And it happened thanks to my grandfather, blessed memory. He wouldn't talk about this. He wouldn't walk around publicizing it. There is a book that was actually published that tells the whole story, but it's not really as well known of a story maybe as it should be. But what I find remarkable really is two things. 10 years after he heard his teacher saying, when you have a good idea, you jump on it, you do something right away. You don't wait until the train arrives at the home station. You get off right then, and you send a telegram right then. You don't wait. That was something that his teacher said 10 years ago. It was still reverberating in his head. It was still alive and active and present. And he knew to implement that idea. And he got off the train. And I wonder what would have happened if he did not get off that train. He said, I'm on the way there. I'll be in Stockholm in an hour. I'll take care of it then. I wonder if this project would have ever happened. A, but B, the idea itself. You have an inspiration. You have to know that that is a rapidly diminishing property. You're inspired, you're awakened, you're emboldened to do something positive. The clock is ticking because very soon this will dissipate. In fact, it's already dissipating. You have to strike fast while the iron is still hot. And that's really one of the major ideas of the festival of Pesach, of Passover. The whole story of Passover is one of speed. And of course, the mitzvah of Passover, the Matzah, it's all about speed. If you allow Matzah to linger, you lose it. It becomes chametz, it becomes leavened. And the verse tells us, this is in chapter 12, verse 17, Ushmartem es ha-matzos. You must guard the matzos. You must guard the matzos to make sure they don't become chametz. And the Midrash notes that the word matzos, it's actually spelled the same way as the word mitzvos. It's the same word. Says the Midrash, don't say you should guard the matzos exclusively. This is a generalized principle. You must guard the mitzvos. Just as a matzah, when you're about to bake it, you know that this, if you don't bake it right away, you'll lose it forever. But once you do bake it, you'll secure it forever. A mitzvah is the same thing. When you're awakened, you're inspired, you have a dough. Guard it. Be vigilant about it. Make sure you don't allow it to lose its capacity of transformative greatness. Just as, says the Midrash, we do not allow a matzah to become chametz. We don't just let it sit around and not bake it right away, and then it becomes chametz. Similarly, when it comes to mitzvos, don't make it chametz. You have an opportunity, do it right away. When you are inspired to do something good, like matzah, you have a very fixed amount of time for that opportunity, that potential of achieving that matzah/mitzvah. Once a certain amount of time elapses, it's over. The chance is lost forever. The inspiration will dissipate and will weaken, and unless you concretize it, unless you bake it, you will lose it. And this idea is found in many places in our literature. The Talmud tells us you should always do a mitzvah fast and early. Zrizim makdimim lemitzvos. Those who are speedy, who are alacritous. They do mitzvah right away. You should always run to do a mitzvah, the Talmud tells us. Even on Shabbos when we don't run. For this, we do. There's an amazing story in the Talmud about a very handsome young man who became a Nazir. Now, what is a Nazir? A Nazir is a law. We read about it in the book of Numbers, Bamidbar. It's someone who accepts upon themselves a certain vow. I will be a Nazir, typically for 30 days. And this means that for 30 days, they don't get any haircuts, and they don't drink any wine, and don't come into contact with the dead. And once the cycle is over, the 30 days typically is over, then they actually do cut off their hair. In fact, they cut off all their hair, and they burn it on top of the altar, and they bring sacrifices and so on. This is a vow to be like someone who abstains, to be monastic for a little bit, or to be like a high priest for a little bit. Don't come into contact with the dead, don't drink any alcohol. But this is a law. There's a whole book of Talmud called the Book of Talmud of Nazir. But the Talmud says that actually this was not encouraged. The sages, they tried to dissuade people from accepting upon themselves this vow. They didn't like it. Why? It's a vow of abstinence. It's a radical sort of thing where you say, I'm going to go to the opposite extreme. No wine for 30 days. No contamination to the dead. I'm going to be someone who's going to seclude myself. I'm going to abstain from physical pleasures for a definitive amount of time. And it's almost like a radical step. And the sages said, that's not really the way that you grow and progress and develop. You take small incremental steps. That's the better way to do it. And therefore they discourage people from becoming a Nazir. And the Talmud tells over a story of Shimon the Righteous. Shimon the Righteous is one of the high priests, one of the great personalities of the early part of the Second Temple era. And he says, I disapprove of people accepting the Nazir vow. But there was one exception. I was in the temple and I see this Nazir and he's really handsome and he's beautiful eyes and flowing lots of hair. And he comes in from the south. And he needs a haircut. All those luscious locks are all going to be cut off and burned on the altar. And I said to this young man, why did you become a Nazir? Why did you do something that will necessitate that all that beautiful hair gets cut off? And the young Nazir responded, I'm a shepherd, and I work as a shepherd for the flocks owned by my father. And once I was out in the fields and I was getting some water from a spring to give to the sheep, and I saw in the water, I saw my reflection. Mirrors were not as ubiquitous then as they are today. So he saw himself for the first time. And you just see just how handsome he was. And he felt a groundswell of the Yetzer Hara, of the evil inclination within him, trying to propel him to sin. And when I saw that, and when I felt that, I said right away, I'm going to make sure that all the hair gets cut off for God. How could I try to seek pleasure in the world of the body, in the body that ultimately will be consumed by worms and maggots? I'm going to make sure that my hair will all be cut off for the sake of God. And he became a Nazir. He accepted upon himself the vow of a Nazir. He said, Hareini Nazir, behold, I am a Nazir. And that set into motion a period, a month typically, where the end point of it will necessitate that he will have to cut off his hair. When Shimon the righteous heard this, he stood up and he kissed this Nazir on his head. He says, I disapprove of Nazirim, but you, well, if only there were more Nazirs in Israel like you. That's the story. Interesting story about someone who used the law of the Nazir to cut off his hair and thereby curb his runaway evil inclination. And one of the commentaries makes a fantastic observation. Suppose someone is stricken by the Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. And they feel like this propulsion, this predisposition, this impetus, this catalyst to go sin because of their beautiful hair. And they want to fight back. They don't want to succumb to the Yetzer Hara. They realize that this world, the world of the body will ultimately be consumed by worms and maggots. Why am I investing so much in this world? By investing in this world, I'm forfeiting my world to come. Makes no sense. I have to try to avoid this problem. But look at the hair. It's so gorgeous. So there's a solution. Take a pair of scissors and snip it off. There are much simpler ways to get a haircut than to say, I will become a Nazir, and for 30 days I won't drink wine, come into contact with the dead, and I won't get a haircut for 30 days, but at the end I will necessarily have to have a haircut, and then I'll cut off my hair. If you need a haircut, there's simpler ways to do it than to become a Nazir. That's the question that the commentaries asked. Why go through the whole rigmarole of becoming a Nazir just because at the end of that process, you must shave off all your hair? And the answer that the commentaries tell us is this. You are inspired. You must do something now. If you wait, you lose it. And that's why the Talmud tells us the whole backstory. He was a shepherd and he's out in the field. He's far away from the scissors, from the haircut machine. If he was home and he saw it, maybe he would have just snipped off his hair and solved the problem like that. But he's out in the fields. And when you're out in the fields, there really is only one way to make sure that you solve your hair problem. And that's to say, I will become a Nazir, a Hareini Nazir. I am a Nazir. Behold, I am a Nazir. That you can do wherever you are. And once you say that right away, you guard the mitzvos, you maintain the inspiration, you make it real, you make it concrete, because you know that by the time you get home, that inspiration to overcome the Yetzer Hara and to cut off that hair may be long gone. Inspiration of all types is fickle. They don't last. It's cheap and it's rapidly diminishing. When someone has an inspiration, a good inspiration, and they want to make something out of it, they must get off the train right then and there. And they must send the telegram right then and there. They must exercise that inspiration right then and there, or it will disappear forever. The Torah tells us you should guard the matzah. Says the Midrash, you should guard the matzah, but you should also guard the mitzvah. The process of making matzah and the process of making a mitzvah is the same. You make the dough, you have the inspiration, and you cannot allow it to just linger there, because then it will turn into something else. It will turn into chametz. No longer will it be a candidate for matzah. Similarly, the inspiration is like the dough. You want matzah, you have dough, you must very quickly turn that into a mitzvah. Bake it into a mitzvah so that you don't lose it. This is what my grandfather learned from Rabbi Yerucham, and this is what he did. And I surmise that if he did not get off that train, then if he waited till he got to Stockholm, I would imagine that the story would have played out differently. Because that's the way the Yetzer Hara works. You have an inspiration, it's coming after you. The leaven is coming after you. It's not a surprise that the Talmud says that the Yetzer Hara is the leaven in the bread. That's one of the nicknames of the Yetzer Hara. It's the leaven in the bread. It's leaven in the dough, to be precise. Leaven in the dough. Sa'ar shebe'isa. Leaven in the dough. You have dough, you have an opportunity. One of two things will happen. Either you'll turn it into a matzah mitzvah, or the Yetzer Hara will encroach upon it. And the determining factor is the speed. You have to do it fast. You have to bake it fast. You have to find some way to take that and translate it into action. Now, what I'll tell you, there's a flip side of this. There's the exact opposite of this. What if it's the Yetzer Hara trying to make matzah? Just to use this analogy. What if someone's inspired not to do a mitzvah, but to do a sin? When someone's inspired, God forbid, to do a sin, the way they win is by not doing something right now. By staying on the train and not doing something right now to actualize the plan of the Yetzer Hara. And just as inspiration that's positive will diminish and dissipate over time, inspiration that's negative will diminish and dissipate over time. Someone's awakened by the Yetzer Hara to do something terrible, to do a sin. That does not necessarily mean that they will do that sin. Well, how do you overcome it? How do you defeat it? How do you ensure that the idea, the inspiration for something bad does not get translated into action? It's just the exact opposite of that. You stay on the train. You don't do something now. And the Yetzer Hara is like trying to inspire to do a sin. You just wait it out. Let's talk about it tomorrow. Let's sleep on it. You sleep on it, and you're fine. What happened to all that inspiration? It went away. That is the Achilles heel of the Yetzer Hara. It too can only succeed if something immediate is done to actualize it. It's an amazing thing. If you look at the first sin of them all, Adam and Eve in the garden, they eat from the tree of knowledge, good and evil. That was a bad sin. They were inspired to eat from that tree, and they ate from that tree. What's amazing is that we know that that day was Friday. And had they waited till Shabbos, our sages tell us, the tree would have been defanged of any evil, and they could have even eaten from the tree. And it wouldn't have been damaging. So the sin was not that they were inspired to sin, but rather that they were inspired to sin and took immediate action without allowing that inspiration to weaken over time. Had they simply delayed, they would have triumphed. The golden calf. Where's Moshe? We're freaking out. We don't know where he is. They made the miscalculation. And they took immediate action. And had they just simply waited a few more hours, all would have been well. The nation, our nation, we have an arch enemy. An arch enemy that really is someone that comes from very close to home. Jacob and his twin brother, Esav. That's like our mortal enemy. And there's many, many, many stories of these two forces clashing. And what you will notice is that in every instance, the plan is not to pummel and overcome Esav, rather to outlast him. Esav wants to kill Jacob, so he escapes. and I'll go east to Laban until my brother's wrath dissipates. There's an inspiration for the other side to win. Wait it out. Jacob has a fight, a battle, a nocturnal struggle with the angel of Esav. And he wins it. Well, how does he win? Not by overpowering him, but by outlasting him. When it's the morning, you haven't lost. Well, that's how you win. Once these two forces burgeon into nations, the Jewish nation leaves Egypt and they're attacked. The first enemy is Amalek. And the war happens tomorrow, the next day. When you have an encounter with Amalek and its spiritual forces, the Yahrzeit, the Satan, the best tool you have is to outlast it, is to wait, is to delay. In a very strange law, in the book of Devarim, we read how if you go to war and you meet this beautiful captive and you want to just be with her, well, you could have her, no problem. You just have to wait like 30 days. And the commentators explain that this is the perfect way to overcome the Yetzer Hara. Not to say no, but to say tomorrow. And it's the complete inverse of what to do when you have a good inspiration. When you have a good inspiration, you don't say yes, you say now. When you have a bad inspiration, you don't say no, you say tomorrow. If that's all you knew, and that's all you did, you are on the path to greatness. We see a story in the life of my grandfather that's very unique. Someone who has no money, no clout, no real backing, just a small group, not even a minion of Jews in a whole country that were Shomer Shabbos. They very often, most of the time, they didn't even have a minion. And they want to do something good. And they pull it off. And my grandfather, when he recounts the story, he says, I remember what Rabbi Rucham said, you have an inspiration, you do something right away. You jump off the train. Don't jump off the train. You get off the next stop. The most immediate thing that you can do, send a telegram ahead of you. We're meeting tonight. Send a letter to the Ministry of Interior. What are the odds you'll get a positive? It doesn't matter. You do what you can. Let God do what he can. How many buildings do you need? We'll start with one. That story, I wonder if there's 10,000, 100,000 Jews today who would have maybe been Swedes, lost to the people forever, if not for this school. We are fortunate to have great teachers, great sages, great inspirations. When we hear inspiration, it's supposed to become real within us. 10 years after you hear something, and you're in a situation where you're on a train, you remember that. Remember what I learned. And you implement it. But all inspiration, unless there's some way that you make it real, that you ground it, that you transform it from the realm of the theory of the abstract into the practical real life, it will go away. Our sages encourage us, whenever we study anything in Torah, to think of ways to make it practical. How do I implement this in my life? Is there something I could do real to make this idea not just an idea, to make it real? My grandfather, blessed memory, exemplified this quality, both that of being a student who's always reviewing the teachings of his teachers and implemented it in his life, and particularly this idea when you were inspired. You have a dough. Guard the matzah. The matzah is being attacked. There is the se'or shebe'isa, the yeast, the leaven in the bread, in the dough. It's coming after you from all directions. Your choice is to bake it And once you bake it, it will last for 100 years. You have matzah. Once matzah is baked, you could use last year's matzah this year as well. It helps to toast it a little bit. You toast it a little bit, it gets a little more crunchy. But matzah, once it's baked into matzah, it's good forever, really. But if you allow it to just sit around and you don't guard it, then the leaven will win. The Yetzer Hara will win. Do something right now. You do something right now, you have created a matzah. You have earned a mitzvah. It's a story from my grandfather's life. It's one story. It's a lesson for us to appreciate and hopefully integrate into our lives. We never know when those opportunities will arise. And all of us are inspired in one way or another, in one point of our life or another, to do something good. And much of human inspiration is lost, is never consummated. And the reason why is because the dough became leavened. The Yetzer Hara was awakened and joined the party. And once the Yetzer Hara is there and enough time has elapsed, the matzah is done for forever. Guard the matzah. Guard the mitzvah. You're out in the field. You can't do anything. I'll deal with it later. Forget about it. It's done. Make yourself into a Nazir right now. Is there anything I can do right now to advance this inspiration? If yes, I must do it. If not, the Yetzer Hara, the leaven, will encroach and ruin my ability to have the matzah, to have the mitzvah forever. May we all be so fortunate as to take this lesson to heart and be inspired by it and hopefully do something about it and do something about all the inspiration that we are fortunate and meritorious to have. When there's a good inspiration, the clock is ticking. When there's a bad inspiration, the clock is ticking. If all you do is say, the good things, let me do right now. The bad things, let me wait 10 minutes. Let me sleep on it. If that's all you do, you're on the path towards succeeding in making the matzah, in making the mitzvah, and in avoiding the encroachments of the Yetzer Hara, of the se'ar shebisa, the leaven in the bread, and you are on your way to accomplishing great things. May we all be elevated from what we learned about my grandfather, of blessed memory, whose Yartzeit is the 17th day of Nisan, which is the first day of Chol HaMoed, of the in-between days, the intermediate days, between the festival days, in the diaspora, in Israel, where they only have one Seder, only one day of Pesach, of Yom Tov on either end. It's the second day of Chol HaMoed. May we be inspired and uplifted from his story, and may his memory serve as a blessing to all. May his soul, his elevated, righteous soul, become more elevated in heaven, and may we all take a page out of his book and inspiration out of his story. My email address is rabbiwolbe@gmail.com. I look forward to your questions, your comments, and your feedback.